Well, welcome everybody. Oh, that speaks quite loud. My name is Reg Urbanowski. I'm the Dean for the College of Rehab Sciences, and I'm here with Ken Doyle from TACs Canada today. We want to talk about a project that we're going to get off the ground, and it's about trying to address some of the housing needs that people have in First Nations communities. Across Canada, we're going to start with Manitoba, and I just want to explain, I think, from our end, where we're coming from. And by the end of this session, hopefully you get an idea of the project, and we can talk some more later on after this if people may have an interest in joining into the project. So this is really just an orientation to the project itself. This is part of a project of a group of communities that we work with, and Lisa, you'll be familiar with this. We have a project called We Will Work Together for Health and Wellness that consists of a group of 9, actually soon to be 11 communities in Manitoba, and the name up there in Anishinaabe and in Cree as well. There are 5 communities from that group that we want to work with in the housing project, and that's Sagin First Nation, Lake Manitoba, Penemutang, Norway House, and OCN. So we've got a good mixture of people that are in the north and people that are in the south. Our lead for the project right now is Chief Henderson from Sagin First Nation. And in our conversation this morning, he sort of agreed to sort of bring together the other communities, but we have talked to the communities. They are on board with us for this program. We're looking at also having partnerships. Partnerships across this university, I think, are important. So I can see us having partnerships with engineering, architecture, computer science, law, business, because it will take all of us to sort of work together, I think, to address the housing needs that people will have. But I also think that there's some expertise that we need to leverage from the technology centers right across the country. And if you're not familiar with Tech Access Canada, maybe Ken, you can talk a little more about that.
Happy to do so. So my name is Ken Doyle. I'm the Executive Director of Tech Access Canada, and it's a network of Canada's technology access centers, and I'm based in Ottawa. So effectively, a technology access center is a specialized R&D center affiliated with a college or cégep, and they're across the country, and the name is fairly cryptic. Technology, they are at the cutting edge of emerging enabling technologies to service the R&D and innovation needs of the industrial sector of importance to their region. Access, they provide access to their facilities, equipment, and expertise for small and medium-sized companies who don't have in-house R&D capacity, but have a widget they'd like to get prototyped, refined, and then out to market. And then a center, they are a physical center. They have a location, a sign out front. They're different than a lot of the other research that happens in the college sector, where it's more project-based. They second some faculty, do a project, and then release them back into the wild at the conclusion. The technology access centers are set up with a dedicated R&D team and staff of researchers, scientists, technicians, technologists who are on call 24/7 to solve these problems of these small companies. The service offerings they have are technical and business services, quick hit engagements, applied research and development projects that could be 4, 8, 12 months in duration. They also provide customized training for a small company that maybe just purchased a $80,000 robot welder. How do you train your employees on it? How do you integrate it into the workflow? And then technology diffusion, they also have a responsibility to socialize companies and then the population in the region of new emerging enabling technologies coming out. These are the current 47 technology access centers in Canada. The next slide's a map. I'll show it to you, but they are in every domain from aerospace to agriculture, food innovation, advanced manufacturing, pulp and paper, honeybee commercialization. Whatever's important to the industrial sector of the region, they're set up with the capacity and capability to assist these companies. So the names can be sort of pigeonholing. The Aerospace Technology Access Center, it's located just south of Montreal, focused on aerospace, obviously. But the technologies they're working with, non-destructive testing, composites, advanced alloys, have applicability across industrial sectors. And that's an important nuance for this project, where the names really designate the industry vertical they support, but the capability and capacity they have has applicability for multiple different industrial domains. So that's a little bit tough to see, but there's 47 technology access centers at colleges across the country, heavy concentration in Ontario and Quebec. Mainly that's due to the long-standing provincial supports that these provinces have had to build the capacity so that these centers can receive that TAC designation. Right here in Winnipeg, Red River College has 3 technology access centers: the Building Efficiency Technology Access Center, the Technology Access Center for Aerospace and Manufacturing, and then the Prairie Research Kitchen. So these are all separate centers that have won the competition, and they're servicing the needs of Winnipeg and sort of, within a 100-kilometer distance, the aerospace manufacturing sector, the food innovation sector, and then the residential and commercial building sector. So the project that Reg mentioned that we're trying to get off the ground is going to draw on the expertise, obviously, of the U of M, but also of the technology access centers that have expertise that could be applicable to solving this long-standing challenge. So one of the primary ones will be the Building Envelope Technology Access Center here in Winnipeg. Great team, great expertise, and great track record in construction, building efficiency, building envelope technology. A couple of provinces over in Calgary, there's the Green Building Technologies Access Center. Again, they're focused on green building innovations and encouraging adoption of these new technologies for the primarily residential construction sector, and trying to get the adoption of these technologies and innovations down to a price point that it makes sense for residential builders to incorporate them. But they're versant in technologies from across the world and the impact that can have. And another one would be CEREX, Centre de Recherche en Transformation des Produits Forestiers, in Amqui, Quebec, the sort of Lac-Saint-Jean-Saguenay region. They're a phenomenal center in forest products, renewable energy, green chemistry, those kind of things, and how they incorporate into the building envelope and the construction sector. There's another 2 or 3 centers that, of the 47 centers, every single one has something they could contribute to this project, but we're going to initially cherry pick the ones that have areas of innovation expertise that align directly with this initiative. There's also the Center for Systems and Sensor Integration at NATE in Edmonton, working on Internet of Things, sensors, system integration, all that piece of it, the data, the analytics, the capture. And then the Center for Advanced Wastewater Treatment in Lindsay, Ontario, focused entirely on water, wastewater treatment, remediation, and systems that support that kind of piece of it. So that'll be the initial TACs that we'll bring together and their expertise to lend to the project. The phases, as we envision them, I guess, you want to speak to the first phase, right? Sure. Yeah.
The phase 1 is all about building the teams and scoping out the project, because I think when we began to talk about this notion of housing, it originated because we were visiting communities, and communities were talking about mold. Communities were talking about single-family designs that don't fit with multiple generations of families filling in there. The advent of Jordan's Principal program, which is a program for children with disabilities, has been terrific, but now children can stay home. We need to make those homes more accessible to them. If we talk about people staying in their homes longer, we talk about aging in place. The standard model single-family dwelling doesn't fit anymore. So there's a whole lot of needs that we need to fill when you talk about access to health technologies. We need to talk about sensors. We need to talk about ways that we can connect people in those communities that don't have access to health services with healthcare providers. So there's a whole lot of things that we need to be considering in this process. And so we just threw those things out there, but then we thought, we need to find a way to bring people together. And so this phase 1 is really about bringing people that have an interest together, the experts and the communities. And so what we talked to Chief Henderson about this morning, actually, was having a meeting, a first gathering of some of these people that are across from the U of M campus that may have an interest, as well as some of these people that are in the access centers that you talked about. We also talked about another one in Hamilton that is health-related. that also is dealing with sensor technology, so that we can bring all of these people together here in Winnipeg, together with some of the folks from the communities. We'll spend some time here. We spend some time in Saugeen so that we can have, I think Chief Henderson was suggesting, come and talk to people to find out about what are the issues that they're having with their current housing stock, the houses that they're living in. So it begins that process of building a team. That helps us to scope out what the project should look like. We're looking at doing this probably in March, and that'll help us to define the project further. So this is a longer-term process that we want to make sure that we have something that's community-informed, community-designed, and community-owned at the end of the day. Right?
Thank you. And then for phase 2, that's where the rubber will hit the road, where the entire college applied research model, technology access center model is demand-driven R&D, demand-driven innovation, responding to industry challenges. So you've hit a roadblock on your way to commercialization. You've got your widget sort of as a crude prototype. You need it refined to get out to market. You come, visit the TAC, their team refines it, hands it off to you, you go to market, be incredibly successful. We're going to take the exact same approach with this, where phase 2, after we've done the phase 1 of scoping the problems, the issues, phase 2 is about figuring out what that project looks like, to develop a prototype of literally the perfect, sustainable, family dwelling for on-reserve use that will be sustainable and maintainable across multiple generations, that reflects the realities of life, everyday conditions on the reserve. So we're going to bring together the smartest people from the technology access centers, the university, the communities, to figure out what this prototype looks like, and then design it, and then build it, test it, refine it, figure it out. And then at the conclusion of that, when the perfect house is there, the goal is to design it in such a way that there's a blueprint with the exact SKUs, the product numbers you need, where you could go to Lowe's, Home Depot, whatever, buy it right off the shelf, and then how to assemble it, put it all together. And the goal here is to create obviously the perfect house, but also the training module to assemble it, but then more important, maintain it going forward, so that we can train the incredibly talented resources on reserve in the communities about how to maintain these houses going forward, using all of the most up-to-date training and technologies that we have available to make it enjoyable and accessible to build, maintain, and improve these houses, and do it in such a way that it's modular, so as the technology evolves and changes, simply plugging and playing the new up-to-date tech will work on these houses. And we also are fully cognizant that there's no one-size-fits-all solution for every community in the country, given the rural and remote nature, urban, that kind of thing. So there will be modularity built in to address these challenges. So that will be sort of the phase 3, and the overarching goal here is to, when the final product is developed, much like the college applied research model, take that intellectual property and hand it off to these First Nations communities to retain ownership of, build, commercialize that piece of it. So effectively, that's the game plan, and we're very much in the startup phase, and we would love to seek input, best practices, stuff to avoid any piece of that from anybody assembled. So figure maybe open it. Is that? Yeah. Oh, yeah, I guess I forgot to do this one. So again, it just sort of shows the long winding road of an applied research engagement with the Technology Access Center, that from the very first start, the initial meeting, the scoping the project, the feasibility study, there's a lot of places where the project can go off the rails or fall apart. And we see this overarching initiative as a number of sub-projects that follow the exact same process that will lead to, when they're all done and their different timelines operating in parallel, will create the perfect prototype that will be built, tested, and then refined. So that would be phase 2, and then phase 3 is once it's built, the pedagogical piece of the training, how to build, how to maintain, how to make that enjoyable. So I think that's it.
Yeah, and I think for us, the piece on this is where do we start? it started as how do we get people together to have a conversation? Like I said, this is not a project that is driven by expert. We want this to be driven by community, and that's very important for us. So right now, we're looking for interest in having conversations together. And it's very possible that people will come in from the universities or the colleges at different points of projects and leave at different points. But that's really where we're at right now. I think when we were looking at the process, we're looking at this as a long-term process. To do this right, we have to be able to work with communities, and that takes longer. But I think it's far better if we can do that. I think phase one, we are looking at months in order for us to be able to do this. We are looking at funding sources that we're having meetings with right now to look at how we can actually create the gatherings that we need to be able to discuss this further. So it's really right now open to discussions and questions.
Have you been in touch with those that are responsible for the INAC Indigenous Homes Innovation Challenge that was launched, I think, last year? So INAC had a...
Can I just stop you and ask to speak in the microphone, because I know that there's a lot of people watching online.
Sure. So the question was the connection to the INAC Innovation, I think the program is called their Indigenous Homes Innovation Challenge, which, if I recall correctly, was launched for applications last summer. Quite large program. They had a couple of meetings here at the University of Manitoba during the planning stages of it to map out how the program might work. Those of us from engineering and architecture were involved, as well as representatives from a number of First Nation communities and representatives from a number of other universities. I think Vancouver Island University was involved, Laurentian was involved, and I'm probably missing one or two others. All that to say that within architecture and engineering, there's been quite a bit of work on Indigenous housing issues over the years, including the issue of mold that you mentioned and what building materials contribute to mold or don't. The impact of mold on child health and in particular the school attendance of youngsters in some of these houses. There's been a lot of discussion around not just the design of the housing, but the design of the community. And if we build houses on floodplains, they're going to get mold and they're not going to last. So how do we have planning practices that avoid that type of situation arises that we know will just run into problems? So my first suggestion would be that you probably want to get in contact with Sean Bailey in the Department of Architecture, who's our Indigenous scholar in the Department of Architecture and is involved with Indigenous Homes Innovation Challenge. I think he's attending a session, I'm not sure if it's this month, next month, it's coming up in Nanaimo with a number of organizations and communities that are concerned about Indigenous housing. So I think given the direction that you're trying to achieve, there would be multiple faculty members in architecture and in civil engineering that'll be interested in participating. So I mentioned Sean Bailey from the Department of Architecture, but there's also people in city planning that have been looking at this as well. So we can talk about who those people might be offline if you want. Yeah, but there's quite a bit of expertise pre-existing that have looked at elements of this problem anyway. Yeah. And I think that the Indigenous Homes Innovation Challenge program actually provides an opportunity to move some of this forward, and my understanding is they have as a goal to build a variety of different types of, if you like, model Indigenous homes across the country in different communities, both urban, rural, to evaluate, so what can work given the particular climate, the particular geographic challenges, and the cultural challenges that all exist within this. So, but Indigenous Homes Innovation Challenge, it's a pretty big federal government program that was launched last year. So I think that's definitely one avenue to look at.
Perfect. Thank you, Jonathan. I think you brought home 2 points. One is, I wasn't aware of that, but we have started conversations with ISC and CMHC on some of their initiatives, so that's an important one. The second one is, we are not starting from zero. There's been a lot of history of things that have worked and things that have not worked. And someplace in our scoping process, it's how do we get all that stuff together and mull that through. I think it's an excellent point.
You mentioned there's 9 involved right now, and you're going to have 11. Is that correct?
So that's in our, we have a community project with the College of Rehab Sciences called We Will Walk Together for Health and Wellness. So there are 9 communities in there right now. 5 of these communities would be working on this project.
First Nations?
Yes, yes,
5 are the First Nations?
yes. So it's Saugeen, Penemutang, Lake Manitoba, and Norway House.
I have a few questions because I'm a First Nation. I grew up on the reserve, so I know what it's like on the reserve, conditions on the reserve.
Yes.
And my community of Lakes Martin was completely flooded out in 2011. The government declared my community as a disaster and that destroyed us. So when they declared it, a completely.
Sorry, we get you to use the microphone. Thank you, Lisa, for being so diligent.
Oh, okay. You want me to restart?
Start with the Lake St. Martin. Yes, please.
I'm a First Nation member from Lake St. Martin, and I'm also the Indigenous scholar in the Faculty of Science. And my community of Lake St. Martin was completely destroyed during the 2011 flood. And my community, the original community of Lake St. Martin, which was located on the shores of the north shore of Lake St. Martin itself, the lake, doesn't exist anymore. The government relocated us. And the historical lands of First Nation communities are around water. Every single one in Manitoba, if you look at the map, they're around water. And a lot of these communities are flooded because of policies which they have no control of, no say. And my community, Lake St. Martin, is one of these. And we got relocated to new land, which is a couple of kilometers north of the lake itself. We never had a referendum whether or not we wanted to move to that land. We just, the government unilaterally made a decision to move us to the land. The houses that are constructed there, the First Nations people had no say in what they would look like. When I was doing my research, I was being a bit facetious when I said that the new housing should be built on stilts. And First Nations, given canoes, to transport them. That's what I said, that because they're built on floodplains. And because of policies, past policies, with the Indian Act, they have a lot to do with the way First Nations are right now. And without addressing the components of the Indian Act, projects like these, they're good projects, but you have to address the policies within the acts too. For example, my community, they started building and they were relocating the community back. They built new housing, but because they took away First Nations people's independence, where they used to build their own homes and now they don't build their own homes. And they used to take care of their own homes because they constructed them, and now they were given because of policies within the Indian Act. And these homes that were constructed because of people who are moving into the new homes don't have experience with these nice houses. I call them, nicer than the way they were before. They were starting to mold already, and yet they've just been occupied about a year, a couple of years, because they weren't trained on the proper way to look after the house, like, during the winter when the thermostat, it needs to be set, properly, otherwise it's going to steam up, and, the overcrowding, these things that they have to look at, you have to look at them. There's a lot of things, and when you talk about the people and the way they used to build homes, and they'll tell you, because I did that, I talked to the people, what were the proper ways that you built the houses, before, and they tell you. And these are just a few things, but I think I'd be interested in collaborating with the project.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think you've got a lot of knowledge and experience that would be very useful for us as we move this project through, so yes.
So maybe I can just add a little bit to that if I can. I think that the Lake St. Martin example is, a good example of how maybe we shouldn't do it. We've done it that way, we know it doesn't work. But it also, I think, highlights very clearly, and your comments highlight very clearly, that it's more than just housing issue. And I mentioned before, the planning, and if we build houses on floodplains, they're probably gonna get moldy. But it goes beyond that. It goes to how do we manage water levels in Manitoba? How do we manage the watershed in Manitoba? And when you open it up to that, there's a lot of competing entities in how should we manage water in Manitoba. And at the heart of the problem is we're flat, wet, and muddy. And yet we want to live here anyway, go figure. But if we think about the watershed management, invariably you're going to be bringing all the flooding and conservation organizations into it. You're going to bring Manitoba Hydro into it because they clearly have an influence on water levels in Manitoba. And the problem becomes really quite multidimensional, which for a university should make it the ideal sort of a problem to tackle because we've got all the disciplinary, multidimensional people and experts available to us. But it's focusing everybody on this problem, and looking at some of the legal constraints and the historical constraints that have got us into this problem as well. So I don't think it can just be a housing initiative. It has to be a housing and planning initiative, with the planning not just looking at the local planning of individual communities, but how that plan fits into the overall provincial plan in terms of infrastructure, whether it's transportation, communications, and flood mitigation, all in one. Because I agree with you, Lake St. Martin, it should be an embarrassment to all of us in the province. I don't know that it is, but it should be.
Yeah.
So that'd be my comment.
I agree with you, Jonathan, and I think it's something that we have to strongly consider. I mean, my experience is more with the folks in Little Saskatchewan because we work with them as well, but if you look at sort of the relocation that has happened with the folks in Little Saskatchewan, there's a lot in terms of the planning. It's not just the houses, it's...
Yeah, there's a lot of issues.
Oh,
Planning,
yeah,
water,
yeah. And it begs to that bigger discussion. It really does, and maybe this is the wedge that brings us out, right? Again, so... And I think, we did talk to law about getting involved, because at some point, inevitably, this is where you're going. At the crux of the matter is perhaps policy on this. So I think maybe, Ken, we need to sort of think about this is a project, but there's that bigger conversation that needs to happen. And I think if we can have some of that expertise across the campus here to help build that out and sort of say, how do we have that discussion meaningfully? Because I think there's been a lot of discussions that end up landing with a thud. And we don't want that with this project, right? So.
Yeah, no, absolutely. We don't want to reinvent the wheel because, like you said, there's so much great work that's been done. So we want to take that to the next level, operationalize it, build it, test it, refine it, and perfect it so that there is not another Lake St. Martin example. Mm-hmm. And you're right, the policy implications are, cross-departmental, cross-agency, and then multi-jurisdictional, because the issues Manitoba are facing are replicated in communities across the country and then even internationally. So like Reg said, this is going to be a wedge that drives a much larger and very much needed and timely discussion about these policy implications. And then you just layer on climate change and how that's changing everything as well. It's a huge, huge problem, well beyond the scope of this modest initiative.
So let's maybe, Jonathan, if you've got some people in mind that we should be talking to, let me know. And I think we'd love to have your expertise as well. And let's just begin the process.
But I think it'll be interesting going forward, because we already have the anticipation that this spring could be a major flood event in Manitoba again. Mm-hmm. And of course, 2011 was maybe the last major flood event, and we're still living with the consequences of that. And I already worry, knowing that next spring's going to be a major flood event, as to what decisions are going to be made during that flooding event, when decisions have to be made very quickly, as to whether or not we're going to invent for ourselves a Lake St. Martin 2.0 for 2020.
Yeah.
That's, I don't know, maybe I don't like to crystal ball gaze, but I can see it on the horizon. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I mean, you said it facetiously, but building houses on stilts and canoeing, that may be a viable solution using the building technologies that are available globally. It's just nobody's ever tried it before, because the solutions to date have been pretty cookie cutter and off the shelf. Hell, let's give it a try. Let's at least discuss it with the building technology experts, right?
Lots to think about, but it begins with an earnest conversation, and I think so. I thank you for coming today, and this is just the beginning, right? So, thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Yeah. Can I ask one more thing?
Yeah, absolutely.
Do you have a picture of your proposed homes?
Of the what? Our proposal?
The proposed homes. Do you have anything already?
No, because we want that to be community inspired, right? I think for us, the important feature is that we want to start a conversation with community. And that's where it has to be, as opposed to us coming with something. I mean, all I know is what I've heard when I've gone to community about accessibility being important for children, being important for people that are aging, having housing that's multi-generational, having housing that reflects kind of a land-based style of living, something that is, able to attend to the issues of whether it's mold or those sorts. So there's a lot of things, and even the issue of upkeep and maintenance. I think that's a very real thing. It came out this morning with our conversation. Exactly.
Because, my mother lives on the reserve, and we have to tell her what to do with the proper temperature, the proper humidity, and, everything. We have to not retrain her. We have to train her. This is what you have to set it at.
Mm-hmm.
If it goes too high, it's going to become steamy, it's going to start getting moldy around the windows.
Yeah. See, and this is where I think some of the technology stuff comes into play, right? That we should actually maybe be creating things that helps people, whether it's changing the furnace filter, modifying the temperature, whatever it is.
A smart thermostat that you could adjust for your mother remotely.
Yeah, so it's something that is actually created, right? And so that's where I'm thinking, we need to think creatively here about this, because that has come out before. It came out this morning with our conversation with Chief Henderson, right? That people are new to this kind of living. So.
And phase one is we want to understand the ways of traditional living and the everyday, like what an average day looks like, and ensure that the design of the final product is exactly the pieces that Reg identified, so that the residents don't have to change their way of life at all. They can be reliant on the housing to
Absolutely. Thanks,
last for
Jonathan.
generations and generations without any modification of their day-to-day at all. So an accommodating design. And that's never been done before. It's always been a cookie-cutter thing foisted on people. This is a complete different blank slate rebuild that you know, is respectful and sustainable.
Yeah, and the key is how do you bring the expertise in the community together in a way that's community-inspired, community-designed, community-owned? Right? So.
And with the TAC model, it's you throw down the challenges, here's what we need this to accomplish at the end of the day, and then it goes into a magic box, and then that design will be reflective to address each one of those challenges using the best technologies available in a way that's reliable and simple to maintain for everybody. And that's the desired goal and outcome of the project, so that's going to feed into every step of the design process.
So I think the next step for us is if you or somebody you know is interested in having a conversation, the initial conversation with communities, let us know. It's an open invitation because we want to have that, and ideally, like I said, we're shooting for beginning to mid-March sometime.
So just, again, just thinking out loud, I mean, presumably, you know, you have to plan for the, I don't know, the 100-year flood, or the 100-year this, or the 100-year that, and, you know, the way, you know, housing is done where there are known going to be earthquakes, or all along the coastal region, say in the U.S.,
Mhm.
right, where you know you're going to get Virgin Islands, whatever, wherever you are, you know, that there you have the yearly or whatever, the tornado, you know, Midwest of the U.S. is tornado land, right? So you build for that, and that doesn't mean you won't have damage, but you have safe havens there, and then if the tornado gets your house, it didn't get you, and then
Yep.
then you rebuild, then you have a natural process to rebuild. So I think the planning shouldn't think you're going to get the perfect structure that's going to last for 500 years or something. It's that you have to build in resilience and expectation that there's going to be.
See, and that's the kind of thinking we need around the table for that discussion, right? So whoever can come and bring that perspective is important, right?
So you might, I mean, again, you might want to, I mean, I'm not one of those people, but where I was in the States, there was a big remote sensing effort that was involved in recovery from disasters. And so there are people who do this, right, professionally, who think about disaster recovery. And it might, even if we don't have that person here in Winnipeg, we might, but if we don't, it might be worth thinking about.
Bringing them into the conversation.
Yeah, even in different contexts,
Yeah.
even if it's about earthquakes or
Yeah.
hurricanes or whatever, not as opposed to yearly flooding or whatever the case may be. Yeah.
Well, I think that's what's a little bit exciting about the design of this project is that it's putting together multidisciplinary teams to attack the challenge from every angle and lend their expertise rather than, you know, one person having to be a hero and do all the heavy lifting. It's everybody lends their expertise to a common goal, and that's going to provide the optimal outcome because it's been looked at from every single perspective. So the more perspectives we can get on the team, the better results we're going to have at the end.
I would say the timescale for different things may be different. So the policy changes, the political part is probably going to take longer, to be honest with you. So, but maybe, or is less determinate or something, but you already know if you just put the houses on stilts or something, whatever the case may be, you know, there might be, you might try and lay it out in some kind of program plan where you create an immediate solution, and then you work to resolve these issues of sharing of resources, which is basically the problem, right?
It's an interesting time because, you know, with Jonathan talking about the potential flood in the spring, you've got a federal government that has signed on to the UN Charter and making commitments. You know, I mean, there's a lot of things.
Difficult to deliver.
Yes. There's a lot of churn going on right now, and I think the key is to try and direct some of that churn towards this issue. All right. Thank you for coming, and please do think about if you want to become involved or if you know somebody that we can talk to.
Email distribution list now by virtue of having shown up, or?
Yeah, no. We've got a list of who's accepted the meeting is all we have. But you know what we can do is if you are interested, we can just leave a sheet of paper here and just send us your stuff, and I'll just leave some of my cards and you can just email me as well. That work? Okay. All right, thank you. Let me